Roleplay is a portion of the game that never truly goes out of season. It's one of the few things in the game that doesn't rely on new content patches or balance updates in order to enjoy. Of course, it's a matter of taste, but I've heard from more than one person that they've always been a little envious of my occasional funny stories that I have to share. Hey Radish, how do I get into roleplay in World of Warcraft? Well, I've got 3 tips that I always share. And after thinking about it for a little while, I realized you guys might want to hear these tips too. Tip number 1, get an add-on. I use XRP, but there's not really a wrong choice. I've been trying to learn TRP because of the huge amount of extra features, and they're really neat. In fact, I might do a whole other video just about what that add-on can do, but that stuff isn't important right now. The important part is that all of these add-ons are cross-compatible, and it's the only way you can read other players' profiles. The important things you're going to look for are the bio and the little currently section. This is how a lot of RP is communicated, explaining important details like what a character looks like. Now, if you're new to RP, it might sound a little silly since it's a very visual game. You know what they look like because they're standing there. But you want to look for details like age, or if they're carrying something precious, if they're nursing a wound, if they're in high spirits or run down. Typically, my characters walk out of a tavern with a visible drunken demeanor, and they have to be talked down from tossing themselves off the towers of Stormwind since they know their wife will never come back. Roleplay is a lot of fun. Tip number 2, observe. It should go without saying, but an RP add-on now lets you read these profiles, and it's kind of interesting just to see the kinds of players that are out there. Some are going to write entire Tolkien-esque backgrounds just to explain the weave of their shirt. And then there's going to be those economical players that just sort of write war veteran. In fact, one of my favorite players I've seen in RP was Only from a Distance. And this goes back to those contentious days of Battle for Azeroth. Towards the end of the expansion, there was a whole quest line where there was an entire army of Alliance and Horde rebels staged outside of Orgrimmar. And those who were loyal to Sylvanas prepared to defend the war from the inside. A lot of war-weary freedom fighters outside prepared to put aside their loyalties and fight for what's right, and blah, blah, blah. My rogue at the time was playing Sylvanas loyalist, because I was just curious if you played from that side, if it would make more sense. And I don't think they ever did, bother writing that, but, it was interesting. I had to use my shifty rogue abilities to sneak through the rebel camps and sabotage their war machines. And while I was sneaking about, I saw an orc player who was a hunter with long white hair, and he had this extra shaggy looking wolf companion. He was just RP walking through the camps, and so I got a little bit closer, and he had a descriptor on that just read, "Too old for this shit." That one player with that one RP note is maybe the most deep and interesting character I came across in all of Battle for Azeroth. Even when you're not in the mood for RP, or if you don't think you're quite ready to write your own character, at least get these add-ons installed and start reading, because you're going to find a lot of interesting flavor that you've been missing out on this whole time. Tip number 3, do not write a backstory. Backstories are kind of like a trap. I see a lot of role players fall into it when they start out, and it just, they're always the type of player that ends up sitting in the dark side of a tavern and just kind of acting brooding. Usually they end up complaining that they're bored and no one talks to them, and I kind of wonder why. Roleplay in an MMO is a lot like improv. You're at your best when you're reacting, not reciting. Most of the time, when I see someone new to RP, they'll ask for tips, and they'll present their backstory and ask for feedback on it. This backstory will have a lot of details, sometimes walking through their whole childhood and young life, and it's all the parts of their life that are much more interesting than anything they're gonna do in-game. What's worse is, you also see these kind of epics in their in-game RP profile, which frankly does more harm than good. If you, as a player, take the time to read it all, you're probably already exhausted at dealing with them. There's nothing left to ask or talk about because there's no mystery. You kind of know who they are and might have already decided you don't want to bother talking to them. It just creates No jumping on points for interaction, despite the vast amount of information there. Have you ever seen someone walking down the street, and at a glance you can tell that their father left them, so they vowed to be a better father, but they also have a fear of cats, so they vowed to overcome their fear of cats, and now that they're a professional cat groomer, they forgot to make time, for a family, so they feel unfulfilled since all they have are cats and no children? It's much more likely that if you just saw someone on the street, you'd be able to figure out that maybe they're busy and they're on their way to do something, and also that their HP is at 5 out of 5. But you don't know their backstory. You'd have to talk to them to figure that out. The best frame of mind to train yourself in is to learn your character's personality, not their biography. Now, there are different writing styles. Personally, when I write something, I like to have a conversation between myself and the character. I ask them questions, and they respond like a first impulse kind of a thread. It's, you know what? It's a lot like that cringy scene from that Christmas movie.
Mr. Scrooge. I know, let's play a game.
Don't like games.
Oh, humour me. What do you think of when I say the word darkness?
Cheap.
Love.
Swindle.
Money.
Security.
Children.
Useless.
Workhouse.
Useful.
Christmas.
Sylvanus Windrunner. Sylvanus. The trick is in forming a personality for your character. Where your character has been is much less important than how they feel about where they've been. You can, of course, take notes on their biography as you play. It's good to reference stuff like a hometown or a family tree if you need it, but try to come up with fears and interests. Topics that will incite an emotional reaction. One of my favorite characters is my gnome Death Knight. She's very fun to write, but like most Death Knights, she's very cold and distant while dealing with, the whole curse of being a Death Knight. The brooding part of her existence is something she'll never be free of. But an inquisitive part of her former life still lingers, and when presented with a magical problem, she always gets really excited about tackling it. She'll dump theory after theory as her mind races to find a solution. And these brief spurts of passion open the door for other characters to establish a bond with her. In the back of my mind, I know that she used to be a student Dalaran, but no one could possibly guess that just by looking at her. It makes these sort of interactions much more fun because she reacts consistently enough that anyone who gets to know her will be able to figure out this pattern and understand the best way to talk to her. And those are the kind of scenes that you're going to remember for a long time. Well, if you had any respect for me before, hopefully listening to me rave about old RP tips has, helped correct that. You know that I'm just some kind of a loser that plays World of Warcraft. And remember, closing remark to be determined to insert here, don't forget to spell check Alexa save document.